In response to the greatest global crisis of our time, Christ calls us to action. Join the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston as we spotlight this critical issue and offer solutions. Our guest speakers offer their rich insight into the scientific and spiritual aspects of the challenges facing our planet. Welcome to the Laudato Si Faith in Action for Our Common Home Conference.
Brothers and sisters, in Laudato Si, Pope Francis provides great directives for the ongoing conversation, responsible care for the environment. The heart of his message is the theme of integral ecology, with its emphasis on the essential link between care of the environment, natural ecology, and care for the human person, human ecology. As the Pope states, our world is not faced with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather one complex crisis which is both social and environmental. Authentic care for the environment must therefore consider a holistic concern for the being of the human person. This underscores the relationship we have with each other, with the world, and with God who has us with creation and calls to be its responsible stewards. The Holy Father also proposes St. Francis as a model for all people in the bid toward achieving a culture of stewardship, both within and outside the Church. St. Francis demonstrates for all the relationship between inner peace, justice for others, care for the environment, obedience to God's will and His design. Everyone is called to action, from the individual to the corporate world. We are called to be mindful of and change behaviors like the throwaway culture that is opposed to the health of the environment. Laudato Si is a call for solidarity among all people to work for the common good, which is inseparable from human ecology. The earth is our common home, as the Pope says, and we are called to work together to care for it, and to do so with respect and recognition of the dignity of all human persons, most especially the poor and the vulnerable. Let us pray. Praise be to you, Lord, who at the very foundation of the world created man and woman and placed them in a garden of beauty. Grant that walking in the footsteps of St. Francis, we might be renewed in our care of creation and the care of created things, be brought into deeper friendship with you, who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen.
Well, hello, everyone. Giving myself a little bit of room here. Well, Phil, our next speaker, and I speak often about things of climate change and the Catholic call to care for creation. So I've got 8 hours of slides to share with you in 20 minutes. So this will be the abbreviated just taste. Oh, I forgot my clicker. So this is the abbreviated taste of what we can talk about further on another time. So what I want to do is talk about faith perspectives about why we should care about climate change. And I'm going to do this in two parts. First, I'm going to talk about tradition. What have our earliest teachings about right relationship with the planet, and then more recent teachings about right relationship with the planet? What are humans doing here? What was God's intention as far as one can tell? And then look at Scripture. I'm going to limit my scriptural conversation to just a little bit about creation stories. Okay, that's where the other 6 hours would come in. Okay, you with me on that? And then I'll have a couple of summary slides to go. Very good. So, beginning the tradition. One of the first, the oldest writers we have in the Christian tradition after the Gospels is Irenaeus of Lyon. And he says, and you'll have access to all of these slides. I could use a little bit of light. Because I want to see my notes. Just a bit. I'm sorry. Yes, okay, good. Irenaeus says, the initial step for a soul to come to knowledge of God is contemplation of nature. So according to Irenaeus, if you want to have the fullness of God, you need to contemplate nature, not just the inside of your churches and your sacred books. Augustine, I taught at the Oblate School of Theology for several years. The seminarians like this one a lot. St. Augustine. Some people, in order to discover God, read books. But there is a great book, The Very Appearance of Created Things. Look above you, look below you, note it, read it. God, who you want to discover, never wrote that book in ink. Instead, he set before your eyes the things that he has made. Can you ask for a louder voice than that? Why, heaven and earth cry to you, God made me. Again, if you want to know God, you must go outside. The books are important, but they're not the only source we have for knowledge of God, knowledge of the Holy. All of these slides will be available to you afterwards. I've got this plus a whole lot more quotes, so don't try to write all of this down.
All the hours.
Yes, actually, of the quotes, yes. Hildegard. We shall awaken from the dullness and rise vigorously toward justice. If we fall in love with creation, and deeper, we will respond to endangerment with passion. Falling in love with creation is the key here for Hildegard. Notice I'm jumping through the centuries because this is the short story. Thomas Aquinas, Dominican, doctor of the church. Here he's saying that those of you who think, if you go to church on Sunday and you're a really good lector and you teach CCD and understand the catechism, that's important, but it's not enough. Because if you don't also understand creatures, you will automatically be led to a false opinion about God. Now, he says this pretty strongly here, and if you don't like it, you can argue with Thomas Aquinas. But the idea over and over again in the earlier writings here is that to get a full understanding of who God is, we also have to understand scriptures. This is Meister Eckhart. Eckhart, again a Dominican, and this one is not a quote, but it's a poetic rendition that people think is authentic to what he would have been teaching. He says, apprehend God in all things. For God is in all things. Every creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word of God. If I spent enough time with the tiniest creature, even a caterpillar, I would never have to prepare a sermon. Anyone who truly knows creatures may be excused from listening to sermons, for every creature is full of God and is a book. Now, for Meister Eckhart, as one of the premier Dominican preachers in our history, to say this is actually quite profound. He's also said, if he went into the cathedral and no one was there, he would still have to preach. He was so full and passionate about preaching. So his emphasis on knowledge of creatures is striking. Teresa of Avila. If we learn to love earth, we will find labyrinths, gardens, fountains, precious jewels. A whole new world will open itself to us. We will encounter what it means to be truly alive. If we understand that God reveals God's self to us through the creation, we would enjoy living in that creation more and more deeply. We would not be able to harm it as we do. Jumping centuries again. Again, this is the short story. Blessed John Paul II. The visible world is like a map pointing to heaven. Isn't that wonderful? If you want to see heaven, look at the visible world around you. We learn to see the Creator by contemplating the beauty of His creatures. In this world, the goodness, wisdom, and almighty power of God shine forth, and the human intellect can discover the artist's hand in the wonderful works which He has made. Reason can know God through the book of nature. The idea that the first book of Revelation that God wrote is the creation itself. Long before we had written words, we had the sacred creation, God speaking to humankind through the things that God had made. Pope Benedict. A family needs a home, a fit environment in which to develop proper relationships. And for the human family, for us, the earth is that home. The earth is the home. So we have a responsibility to care for the environment entrusted to men and women to protect it and care for it. It is our home. And this one, continues on the next slide. This is a Q&A, and the question was, Holy Father, what's the most important thing I can tell young people about conscience formation? The Pope talks for a while about care for the poor, and then he says, today we see that man can destroy the foundation of his existence, his earth. Hence, that we can no longer simply do what we like or what seems useful and promising at this time with this earth of ours, with the reality entrusted to us. On the contrary, we must respect the inner laws of creation of this earth. We must learn these laws and obey these laws if we wish to survive. If we as a species want to survive the destruction, we have got to pay attention to the earth, learn her laws, and obey her laws. Continues. Consequently, this obedience to the voice of the earth, of being, is more important for our future happiness than the voices of the moment, the desires of the moment. In short, this is the first criterion to learn about conscious formation in young people. That earth speaks to us, and we must listen if we want to decipher its message. Listen to the voice of the earth. This is not a new idea. It's certainly not a new age idea. The idea that earth speaks to us for our good and to reveal God is deep in our oldest tradition and in our more recent teachings. And Pope Francis from Laudato Si. The entire material universe speaks of God's love, His boundless affection for us. Water, soil, mountains, everything is, as it were, a caress of God. So when you're walking to your cars or your bus stop or whatever from here, think of that as you leave here. Everything you encounter is a caress of God. Now, wouldn't you want to care for that? One more from Francis. The universe unfolds in God who fills it completely. This is a God-drenched universe. There is nothing where God isn't just swimming around and filling it completely. Hence, there is a mystical meaning to be found in a leaf, a mountain trail, a dewdrop, a poor person's face, the buffalo bite, the braze bite, the wind and the clouds above us right now. The ideal is not to pass from exterior to interior to discover the action of God in the soul, but to discover God in all things. So once again, it's not only through my contemplation that I bring the exterior world into my soul, but how I can find God and relate to the whole in everything that is. You with me so far? Do you like that? Yes. That's the fast story. Okay. Now, we're going to turn to Scripture. I understand there's time for questions at the very end of this, so I'm not going to pause here. So I'm going to look at creation stories, and with the time limit, I'm only going to highlight a few things. Because to re-look at creation stories from an ecological lens will give us an additional insight on how the scriptures call us to care for creation. Okay? This doesn't undo anything you already know. It adds another layer. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and everything else. And what I want to say with this slide is simply that the scientists say a very similar thing. In the beginning, there is a formless void. Everything was dark. There was mighty winds. And then, from the scientific perspective and from the scriptural perspective, then everything happens. And God says, let there be light. Skipping to the third day. God said, let the earth produce vegetation. Now, here, God did not say, let there be pine trees. God did not say, let there be broccoli. God said, let the earth produce. The earth herself is part of her ongoing creation. Okay? So that the earth is part of this is important. And then on the fifth day, God says, let the waters bring forth. So it's not only the earth who is commanded by God to participate in creation, it's also the waters. And God says to all of the living beings, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. That's the command to the living beings, to be fruitful, multiply, and fill. Humans receive this command later, but it's not only them who gets it. On the sixth day, God said again, let the earth produce all of the creatures, and so it was. Also on the sixth day, the same day the creatures were created, God creates the human in the image of God's self. Male and female, God created them, saying, be fruitful, multiply, and fill. The same thing the other creatures were told, but the human is also told to subdue the earth. Now here, you need to stop for a moment. The word subdue, if there are any scripture scholars in the audience, and Cardinal, you probably are one of them, the word subdue is not a really good translation of this word. The word subdue simply means to put your feet upon. To put your feet upon. To walk in the garden as if it were your own. To walk as if you were going into your new parish for the first time, or bride into her new home. This is what the word means, to put your feet upon. It's used one other time in Genesis, and that's the story of Lot and the angelic guests, and the townspeople want to subdue them. At that point, it's used with a hostile adjective that makes put your feet upon to stamp. So it becomes a very aggressive word. That's not the case here. To put your feet upon, as a farmer would walk her or his field. The second creation story. This is the story, where am I here? Yes, here we go. This is the story of the heavens and the earth, of their creation. When God made the earth and the heavens, there was no field shrub on earth, and no grass of the field has sprouted. Why is that? For God has sent no rain upon the earth, because there was no human to till the ground. God, in the second story, doesn't create because there's no one to take care of the creation. So then the Lord God formed the human being out of the dust of the ground. There's a Hebrew wordplay going on here. The word for the human being here is the Adam. At this point, it's not a proper noun or name for Adam. It's the Adam, small a. And he makes the Adam out of the ground, the Adamah. So the Adam is made from the Adamah. So this is actually a earth being, a mud creature, a made from the dust of the earth creature that God calls forth. So God makes this mud being out of the earth itself and makes it into a living being, breathes God's own breath into it, and places it in the garden. Because remember, the person's job here is to care for the garden. The Lord puts the human being into the garden to do what? To cultivate and keep it. To cultivate and keep. Cultivate may mean for human use. Humans have the right now to eat the vegetation that's there to care for themselves, but also to keep it, to treasure it. Now, this is sometimes translated as something like stewardship. Stewardship is okay, but it doesn't go to the heart of it here, because the same word keep shows up here in the priestly blessing that Moses tells to Aaron. This is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord shine his face upon you, be gracious to you, and give you peace. This is what keep means. It's not a steward. It's not a manager. It's not someone who makes sure the water is turned off and on the right time. It's not any of that. It's to treasure, to care for deeply. We are told to cultivate and keep the garden. And I think we haven't done all that well, but we'll have more on that later. Now, moving away from that creation story to just one New Testament slide. Why did God send his Son into the world? Well, there are a lot of right answers to that. This is a mission statement we find in John's Gospel. And here the word world, this was written in Greek originally, is cosmos. So listen to it like this. For God so loved the cosmos, he sent his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send his Son into the cosmos to condemn the cosmos, but in order that the cosmos would be saved through him. It's not only about humans. It's not only about Catholics. It's not only about Dominican sisters. It's not only about any one thing. God sends his Son into the world to save the entire cosmos. Everything. And it's through human belief, somehow, and our fidelity to what we learned, that the entire cosmos is saved in God. This is what the scriptures call us to. I could do another hour on just how Paul calls us forward in this, but I will save that for later. Okay, you with me so far? Yes. All right, good. So now, all of that's good. It's a good initial background, but why does it make any difference? So this is a little bit of the so what. Given all that, why should Catholics care about creation? Well, one is the biblical mandate. And you just heard it. We were put into the garden in order to cultivate and keep it. It's our job, through our faith and fidelity to God, to carry out God's salvific plan for everything, not just the humans. Okay, so there's a biblical mandate. One of you can write a dissertation on that another time. Incarnational theology. We should care about creation because God is incarnate in everything. Irenaeus tells us that if we want to know God, we should contemplate creation. He also says that at the very beginning, God adorned the entire creation in Christ. Adorned. That idea of making it beautiful through the presence of Christ. The idea that incarnation in its fullness is Jesus of Nazareth, and the Eucharist and God's presence in everything that is. Incarnational theology. The next one is sacramental principle. Not only is God radically involved in everything that is, radically present to everything, but everything can reveal God to us. Every single thing, God's presence to it can speak to us about God. If you saw the sunrise this morning, you might have said, "Isn't God grand?" when you saw that. When you see a baby's face, maybe you marvel at the generosity of God, or you have a really good meeting or a conversation with a friend, or all of these things. Because God is present in everything, everything has the potential to speak to us about God. Don't you think we should pay better attention? Integral ecology, Pope Francis's contribution. to our Catholic theology. Now, a lot of folks were using this expression already, but the Pope did us the wonderful favor of bringing this into our Catholic theology. Here, the idea is that when we care for creation, we are caring for the poor. And when we care for the poor, we are caring for creation because they're so integrally connected. But that's only two pieces of integral ecology. It's also relationship to God. When we care for the poor, we are also doing what we're called to by God. And when we care for our own hearts. So all of those 4 points are interconnected. Our fidelity to God, our fidelity to our own well-being, our own inner soul, our fidelity to other human beings, particularly the poor, and our fidelity to the creation around us. We care for creation, we do care for all of these things together. And now my last slide. We'll end again with Pope Francis. He says, while the situation is not good and the planet is suffering, the window of opportunity is still open. We have time to do something still, despite everything. Let us not close it. Let us open it with our determination to cultivate integral human development to ensure a better future for generations. The time is now. Don't let that window close before we convert our own hearts to care for the most precious thing we have, our relationship to God through other people and into the creation. I will leave it there for the moment. Next time we'll have hours and hours and hours of talk. Thank you very much.
Our second keynote today is going to take us to the science side of things. Dr. Phil Sakamoto is Director of the Minor in Sustainability at the University of Notre Dame. His role includes developing campus-wide sustainability, related curricula, teaching sustainability courses, engaging in related public outreach, which brought him to us today, and to develop community partnerships. Dr. Sakamoto also works within the church on matters of creation care, recently assisting the Catholic Climate Covenant in planning and carrying out the national rollout of the Vatican's Laudato Si platform. Previously, he provided planetarium programming for the Vatican's exhibit on energy for our common home at the 2017 Expo in Kazakhstan. He formerly worked for NASA as a program manager and acting director of the National Space Science Education and Public Outreach Program, as well as being the manager of a variety of NASA student development and diversity programs. Lest you think that we just brought somebody in who might be able to tell us a little bit about this issue. At Notre Dame, he has been the director of the Program for Academic Excellence at the Center for the University Advising and a diversity and outreach specialist in the Department of Physics. Dr. Sakamoto received his BA in Physics from Pomona College and his MA and PhD in Astronomy from UCLA. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Phil Sakamoto.
Hey, hello, I'm glad to be here. I was worried that when I showed up at the Hobby Airport wearing my LA Dodgers cap, I would be turned away, but they did let me in. I was born and raised in LA, and so you know we have a little beef with the Astros going on. That's okay, because I worked at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. for so many years. You know, from that vantage point, we love Houston. I've been here many times to ostensibly go to meetings down at Johnson Space Center, but honestly, it was so I could come have a meal at Papacitos. All right, the theme of today seems to be skipping centuries, the heck with centuries. My story starts 13.8 billion years ago. The very beginning of creation, which the Vatican has called a gift, a mighty and beautiful act of energy, love, and light. And this is the light the light from the Big Bang itself, the very beginning of our universe, which, as it evolved, eventually formed into things we know of as galaxies and stars, and especially one particular galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy, in which we are pretty fond of a particular star, the one that we call the Sun, which lights up this one special planet that we call the Earth. Now, early on in the Earth's history, 4.5 billion years ago, the atmosphere was very different. It was mostly carbon dioxide. But then something miraculous happened. The first vegetation appeared. And that vegetation was a thing we call blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, which went to work doing what plants do, taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. So this was the first carbon capture, removing carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. And what did it do with that? Well, the early blue-green algae and the other plant life that followed, all that carbon that they took out of the atmosphere was in their bodies, and after they died, they got buried underground. And that which was buried underground eventually became coal, and that which was buried under the oceans became oil and natural gas. In other words, this is where the fossil fuels came from. So the gift of the first vegetation was twofold. One, removing the CO2 from the atmosphere and packing it away out where we don't have to worry about it for the time being. But two, the gift of oxygen, which allowed animals and higher order species like you and me to come into being. So we owe a lot to that blue-green algae. Now, the problem is that the allegedly intelligent life species on Earth decided to dig up those fossil fuels and start burning them. Now, burning, combustion, or in the words of chemists, oxidation, means that you're taking oxygen and reattaching it to the carbon. Now that produces a lot of energy, which is the fire and the heat that we use in fossil fuels, which quite honestly gives us all the comforts of our life. So it's good in that sense. But the end product is water and carbon dioxide. In other words, the process of burning releases that carbon dioxide that early vegetation worked so hard to put away, and now we're putting that carbon dioxide back into our atmosphere. So we're starting to undo this 4 billion years of evolution and creation. Now, you've all heard about the greenhouse effect, but let me give you a really quick sketch of what is happening. So we have the sun, the sunlight passes down to the earth, which is wonderful, warms up our planet, keeps us nice and happy. And as the planet warms up, it does as all celestial bodies do, tries to return the excess heat back to space. But some of that outgoing heat, the heat goes out in the form of radiation, infrared radiation, but certain molecules in the air, particularly carbon dioxide, block some of that heat from escaping. So the carbon dioxide and other molecules that we call greenhouse gases have the effect of trapping some of the heat, which causes our planet to get warmer. Now, here's some visible evidence of how warm the planet's getting. This was an expedition to the John Muir Glacier in Alaska back in 1880. Imagine being on that trip and seeing these big blocks of ice, the glaciers. But now I'm going to show you a picture from the exact same location with the exact same camera angle taken in 2005. Yeah, the ice is gone, melted. What's left of the glacier is far, far up in the background there. The glaciers in Alaska all around the upper north are melting, going away. But there's an even bigger problem than the vanishing of the ice. It's this, that when the ice was there, right, the ice is bright, brilliant white. It's reflecting sunlight, so it's helping cool the planet. But once the ice is gone, you expose bare land, bare water, that's dark and absorbs more light. It's also what makes the ice melt quickly, because as soon as there's a bare spot in the ground, it absorbs heat, melts the ice around it, makes a bigger bare spot, absorbs more heat. That's why the glacier is melting so fast. There's other things that accelerate the warming. Methane pools. This is what happens in tundra throughout our northern lands, especially like in Siberia and Alaska, northern Canada. As this previously permanently frozen ground begins to thaw out, you get puddles. And these puddles are the little short vegetation that grows in the tundra. It's rotting under the water. When you have material doing what we call anaerobic decomposition, rotting in the absence of oxygen, it's plants underwater, it produces methane. Methane, in terms of trapping heat, is like 30 times better at it than carbon dioxide is. So we really begin to worry when we have methane up in the atmosphere. It drives the warming to go faster. And then there's this trick, which has recently been discovered. This big crater in Siberia, one of many thousands that have been discovered out there, that was blown open by methane. Not an explosion methane, but the fact that underground there's methane frozen, presumably permanently down there. But as we begin to warm the planet, that methane melts, well, sublimates is the right term, turns into gas, and erupts from underground. So it's like the tundra's like belching methane, and the northern oceans are doing the same thing. So we're now releasing a lot of methane into the air, which again makes the warming go faster, which melts more methane, and you get the picture, this feedback loops that make the melting go faster, the warming go faster and faster. But it's not just the warming. It's the fact that the warming is now uneven. The polar regions are warming at 2 to 3 times faster than the equatorial regions. So we're getting an imbalance of warming, and that has a big effect on the jet stream. Now, in normal times, okay, many of you in this room remember normal times when we had a normal jet stream that ran around the planet, and sort of this band kept the cold polar air up there and drove weather patterns across the country from west to east, right? My college students today do not remember normal times. Every time I show her out, they think this is the way the world has always been. You know it's not. Well, the jet stream is now weakening. And that's because the energy that drives the jet stream in normal times is that the equator is hot, the pole is cold, so air goes from hot to cold, so you get a wind going northward. But the earth is spinning, so that turns the wind sideways, you have the jet stream. Now it's different. Now you have air going from the hot equator to the not so cold pole. So the temperature difference is less, so there's less energy going into the jet stream. The jet stream is slowing down, weakening, and it can no longer hold its shape. It's acting like a slow-moving meandering stream as opposed to a fast-moving one that cuts a straight path. And so we get all these bumps and wiggles in the jet stream, and they can let cold air come down far south or warm air come up far north, depending on where those wiggles happen to set up. I think you knew that, didn't you? Do you remember in February 21 when the jet stream went way down right here? And I'm told Houston looked like this? It did it? Yeah. I didn't come visit, but... And it took out your power grid, didn't it? Yeah, because there was too much strain, there was too much natural gas being used, and the electricity wasn't made, and it was a disaster. Personally, I still can't believe this picture taken in Houston, but if you say so, okay. But then you also know times when you've been under where the jet stream is coming north, like this last summer. A little warm here last summer. Yeah, so in Texas, we had triple-digit heat waves, which again threatened your whole power grid from breaking down. And this was just one place across the whole country. Here, the last year, which we had complete annual record 2021, every place, every dot on this map shows you a place where there was a record high temperature. Okay, we're talking about 80,000 record daily highs, 4,000 record monthly highs, 800 all-time highs, not only in Texas, but all around the world. So it's very clear that our temperature is getting very warm. And now, as you well know, the temperature is getting so warm that they are life-threatening. That if you do not have air conditioning, you're living in triple-digit weather, it doesn't cool down at night, people will die, and they are. Oh yeah, remember Harvey? Anyone here remember Harvey? Yeah. Harvey was a landmark hurricane, not only for what it did here, but because the way this thing came up, you remember on news, oh, there's a hurricane coming, it's not too bad, but suddenly over the course of just a couple of days, it spun up into a Category 4 hurricane, right? And it was the first recorded storm in the Gulf of Mexico to intensify, especially in the last half day before landfall. It really spun up. And why is that? That's because the ocean is warmer. And the sea surface temperature along the path that Harvey traveled was quite hot, about 7 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than normal. And not only on the surface, it was warmer down to 200 meters deep. So you got a lot of heat trapped in the ocean. Heat that normally is not there. But tropical storms get their energy from the heat of the ocean surface. So when you've got a lot of heat down there, that storm is going to get very, very powerful. And so it's running over this warm water close to shore, and especially right here, that made that guy spin up so strongly before it paid you a visit. And it's not just the winds, right? You know that. It's the water. The sea is warmer. The sea is warmer. So there's a lot of evaporation. A lot of water gets up in the air. The air is warmer. Warm air holds more moisture. Do you guys know anything about humidity on warm days? I walked to my hotel this morning. I thought, wow, I must have landed in the wrong city. It's not humid. What's going on here? But because there's so much more moisture in the air now, when it starts to dump as rainfall, especially from a hurricane, there's a lot more water to dump. Oh, and there's one other thing. With the jet stream weakening, that's one thing that slows down the storm. Remember how Harvey lingered? Right? If the jet stream had been full strength, Harvey would have pushed onward, and your friends somewhere else would have gotten some of that water. But no, it was here. And in fact, in most of the Houston area, I'm told, 5 days of rain for Harvey added up to a 1 in 25,000 year event. A rainstorm so strong that it shouldn't happen more than once every 25,000 years. And in neighboring areas, there's even more rain, right? A 1.5 million year rainfall event. It's unheard of. It's absolutely unheard of. Even calling this biblical is an understatement. This is ridiculous. But if that's a 1.5 million year event, why does it continue to happen? It's happening right now, right? A few weeks ago, we had Fiona, who visited Puerto Rico, leveled that island, took out the entire power grid there, touched down the Dominican, took out all the power there, and didn't stop. That's the thing that really got my attention. Because look, it kept right on going northward along the Atlantic. But look, you have warm water along the Atlantic, which kept the storm going. And that baby didn't stop until it got all the way up to northern Canada, where it made landfall again in Newfoundland. You're not supposed to have hurricanes in northern Canada. But we did. And look at the time. It took about a week and a half or more to make that journey. Again, a very slow-moving storm. And right now, we're looking at Ian, who, from your point of view, thankfully decided to take a right turn and head to Florida for his vacation in Florida instead of in Galveston. But as you know, cut across the entire Florida Peninsula. This is what Fort Myers looks like today. And that storm was not deterred by crossing the entire peninsula of Florida. It just popped on the other side, kept right on going. Spun up again because the warmer waters over on the Atlantic side made landfall near Charleston, South Carolina. And I understand this morning is now playing with Delaware. All right. And here's Charleston now. Let me get one thing perfectly clear. Sometimes people like me, scientists, talk about this, get accused of lying because the claim is that climate change does not cause hurricanes. It's actually true that climate change does not cause hurricanes. What is true, because the number of small storms, tropical depressions, small tropical storms that form today are no different than they have been in the past, really. Actually, maybe even a little bit less. But what climate change does, the global warming, is it spins up those small storms into these massive hurricanes. So what you can bet on, what is very clear, is that as time goes on, we're getting more and more of these very powerful Category 4, Category 5 hurricanes. And again, it's not just the wind speed. Remember, that category just measures the wind speed. It's the rain and the flooding. I don't need to tell you that. And you can expect that you're going to see more and more such events every year. The recent record shows that's true, and more flooding events. And, I didn't even mention the storm surge, right? This baby Ion brought in a storm surge like 20 feet or something. Droughts. Ironically, we also have droughts. So all the water's falling just in isolated places, and it falls so fast that it can't soak in the ground, it just runs off. And that means that droughts caused by ground drying out from the excess heat, caused by the sources of rivers drying out, like the Colorado River now is nearly dry, thanks to the fact that the Colorado snowpack is missing and there's not very much rain out west. And so everything on the map that's red or yellow, orange has been a state of exceptional drought during this year. It's been going on for years and years. So we're suffering from water scarcity at the same time that we're suffering from massive floods. It's almost ridiculous. Of course, once you have droughts, that wonderful vegetation dries out, trees dry out, dead, dried out vegetation means that any fire that starts is going to get out of control. And so now we have out of control wildfires, just all around the world, especially in the U.S. West. Firefighters cannot stop these fires because they burn so hot that they create their own weather patterns. They create convection cells and make strong winds that pick up not just embers, but entire giant tree branches, throw them in the air, drop them hundreds of yards away, and start new fires. You can't contain them. This is where we are. This is a rack of worldwide extreme weather catastrophes. Over the last 20 years, year by year, the yellow is storms, the blue is floods and mudslides, the red is extreme temperatures, droughts, and fires. And it all adds up to, by 2020, we're looking at close to 1,000 extreme weather catastrophes per year, all driven by climate change, all driven by that intelligent species that dug up and burned the fossil fuels. The cost, extreme weather disasters cost the global economy in the last 10 years, $2.5 trillion. In the last decade, it's an increase of almost $1 trillion over the previous 10 years. The insurance companies know this. That's why the people in Florida, most of them are not going to be able to rebuild because they did not have flood insurance. The flood insurance is too expensive. Because the insurance companies know they cannot afford to insure against disasters that are guaranteed to happen. There's also deaths. We used to think there may be 250,000 deaths by 2050 due to climate change. These numbers have been revised upwards. We're looking from food shortages alone, 500,000 adult deaths by 2050, never mind the kids. 100 million people forced into severe poverty by 2030. That's really soon. 660,000 additional asylum applications annually, and another estimate is saying that by mid-century, we're looking at maybe 200 million climate refugees, people who have to leave their homes because it's impossible to live there anymore, either due to extreme storms, due to droughts, which means they don't have water or food. They gotta find a new place to live. Do you understand how many people this is? 200 million is a number of people equal to 2/3 the population of the entire United States who need to be resettled. And I don't think anybody on this planet has any idea what to do to help a resettlement or just for the upcoming climate refugees to survive. Catholic Relief Services knows they're going to go overwhelmed. They're talking about a new policy, trying to create a sort of shelter-in-place thing where they can teach people, farm in drought-stricken areas and very low water usage and so forth. That will help, but in the end, people are going to have to move. So what do we do? What do we do? The biggest thing is we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We have to reduce them. And there's 3 ways to do that. The most obvious is to change the way we produce energy and use it. So yes, please, let's put out the solar panels, the wind turbines, hydroelectric dams. This is actually a hydroelectric dam that we in Notre Dame built ourselves and just started taking power from it, like during the last month in our local St. Joseph River. It doesn't require a dam. It's just underwater turbines, like you imagine, you know, room fans stuck underwater. They spin because of the current to generate electricity. That's all it is. And this little guy in the corner is an artist's concept of a new thing. These are what we call small modular reactors. Small size, new generation, completely safe nuclear reactors, so small they can be built at a central factory, put on the back of a truck, take it to wherever they're needed. And this is going to be a great way to produce energy that produces no greenhouse gases. We need to change the way we grow food and what we eat, because industrial farming strips carbon out of the land. You know, when you grow your crops with a lot of artificial fertilizers and herbicides, pesticides, and all that, your land is no longer fertile. It's the fertilizers growing the crops. And that's putting more and more carbon dioxide into the air. If we return to organic farming practices, picture rich soil. What does it look like? It's black, right? The black is carbon. The best way to capture and so-called sequester carbon is to put it in the ground through proper agricultural techniques. So we need to do that, and all of us need to think about going to plant-based eating, because cattle is one of the largest sources of not only carbon dioxide, but also methane emissions. So we stop eating the cows, we have more food for all the people, and it's better for the planet. And not only that, better for you and I. I mean, didn't your doctor tell you to stop eating so much meat anyway? Yeah. Oh, and the third thing is we have to stop buying so much stuff. We talk about your carbon footprint, what you do in your everyday life that puts carbon dioxide in the air. The biggest part of your carbon footprint is the part that's usually not actually measured. It's all the stuff you buy. Because think of it, everything you buy, raw materials, manufacturing, transportation, all of that requires fossil fuel energy, puts more carbon dioxide in the air. So we need to back away from this. We need to come to, integral ecology. Everything is interconnected. Pope Francis points out to us that, you know, this whole climate change thing, it's not just a technology problem. It's a problem that's rooted in our lifestyle. It's the fact that we do live in such a materialistic world. The fact that our government and economic systems emphasize economic growth rather than conserving resources. So it's the very basis of our culture that's gotten us to where we are. And oddly enough, that culture is kind of anti-Catholic, isn't it? Because weren't we supposed to be caring for the earth, caring for our neighbors, sharing our resources? Well, we need to do that. So here is Pope Francis' new guide for doing it. The Laudato Si Action Platform, released now, 2 years ago now? It's good. What this is, it's a challenge to every Catholic organization on earth. And Pope Francis lays out 7 categories of Catholic organizations: families, parishes, and dioceses, educational institutions, healthcare, lay organization movements, economic sector, and the religious, challenging every category of Catholic organizations to make a commitment to a Laudato Si action platform. Make a plan for how in your organization you're going to go to work, changing lifestyles, reducing carbon emissions, doing your part to get us out of this climate change crisis. And there are 7 categories of goals here: responding to the cry of the earth, so directly responding to climate change; responding to the cry of the poor, which is getting much louder as climate change grows; looking at ecological economics, ecological education, adopting sustainable lifestyles; ecological spirituality, that means like what you heard just before me, by the way, and community engagement and participation. The beauty of the action plan is that your goal, you don't have to do everything. Right? This is portfolio management. You pick out goals that make sense for you and your community and your organization. Make a commitment to them. And we assume that because there'll be so many organizations making commitments, as an aggregate, we're going to take care of all of this. The idea is you spend 1 year in planning what you're going to do, 5 years carrying it out. That's 6, and then the 7th year is a sabbatical year when you sit back and take stock of what has happened and think about what to do next. So this is the action plan that follows the Laudato Si encyclical, which was an exhortation. This is what we do about it. So we now have the rest of the morning to talk about what we do about it, right? Yes. So thank you for your time.
We're moving into the second segment of our morning, which is our lightning talks. So 3 short talks about the elements of our environment in Houston. My name is Monica Hatcher. I am the Social Concerns Director for the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word here in Houston, who are co-sponsoring this event. Before I introduce our next speaker, Sister Rika, would you please just bow your heads for a brief moment of prayer. Laudato Si. Praise be to you, Lord God of creation. Help us to see your glory in every part of creation, even where we least expect to find it. And if we see it being harmed or clouded, help us to reveal it to all. Amen. Amen. Our first lightning round speaker who will talk about the elements of air in our city is Sister Rika Di Malibat, a sister of charity of the Incarnate Word Houston and a family physician. Sister Rika is a board-certified family medicine physician and a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians. In addition to serving on the council of her congregation, Sister Rika is also the medical director of the Christus Point of Light Clinic in Dickinson, Texas, a clinic for the underserved and the uninsured. Sister Rika, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Can we please welcome her with some applause?
But let me know if you can hear it. So in the book of Genesis, and we heard this morning from Sister Linda, she also talked about the creation story. We read, then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust of the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. The air that we breathe is the gift from God. And by the 7th day, God had finished the work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because God rested from all the work of creating. The word rested comes from the Hebrew word vinafesh, which means, and God exhaled. God inhaled, and the world was created. Then God exhaled. The Sabbath was the exhale. The Sabbath is God exhaling and enjoying creation. So what happened to the gift of air in our planet? This is a photo I took in 2019, but you can hardly see the sun because of all the smog in California. I took this during a retreat in Los Altos in the Jesuit Retreat Center. But that's California. Texas is a different story. Houston is the energy capital of the world. And according to Texas Oil and Gas Association website, if Texas were its own country, it would be the world's 3rd largest producer of natural gas and 4th largest producer of oil. So no wonder Texas has the highest CO2 emissions in the United States. And the medical community hasn't been silent in telling us what's been happening in the world in terms of our health. In September 2021, more than 200 health journals worldwide published a joint editorial calling for urgent action to limit greenhouse gas emissions to protect human health. It's probably why the World Health Organization on World Health Day on April 6th of this year announced that almost all the global population, 99% of us, breathe air that exceeds WHO guideline limits and contains high levels of pollutants, mainly resulting from burning of fossil fuels. So it's no longer something far out. It's no longer just our neighbors, it's all of us. 99% of us are breathing air that's polluted. And that prompted the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros, to say that climate crisis is a health crisis. The same unsustainable choices that are killing our planet are killing people. I don't know if you all remember March 18, 2019, the Deer Park ITC explosion. I grew up in an island in the Philippines, and my island is 2 hours away from everywhere else. But this is where I live now. This is the steeple, the bell tower in our convent. And this is the black plume that came from Deer Park, which was 12 miles away. And this was 24 hours later. And I inhaled this black plume for maybe a whole week or maybe more. But that's where we are. Monica said that I'm a physician, I'm a family practice physician, and I mainly serve those without insurance and those who are underinsured. And you know, Texas is also the uninsured capital of the United States. And I worry a lot, not just for myself, because we're breathing bad air, but because my patients who are uninsured are least likely to afford healthcare, medications, and they're the ones who work in agriculture, in the service industries. When there's a flood, they couldn't rebuild fast enough because they're not insured. Their homes and properties are not insured. And they cannot go to work. And that's very, very alarming. There are a lot of unnecessary suffering in the world caused by climate change and the flooding, the typhoon, and everything else that's going on in the world. The Lancet is one of the oldest and most revered medical journals. In May 17 of this year, they said that pollution is the largest environmental risk factor for disease and premature deaths in the world. And it is responsible for an estimated 9 million premature deaths per year, or 1 in 6 deaths worldwide. And in July 28, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed that the access to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a universal human right. We all deserve better. We all have the right not just to live, not just to vote, but to access clean, healthy, sustainable environment. So the American Lung Association publishes every year the state of the air. And this is what they said this year, that more than 40% of Americans are living in places with failing grades or unhealthy levels of particle pollution or ozone. Are you wondering what Harris County's grade is? F, in terms of high ozone days, Harris County. And the particle pollution I did not include here, our grade is D in terms of particle pollution. And I accessed this 3 days ago. So also according to the American Lung Association, that year-round exposure to particle pollution leads to serious health effects. And most vulnerable are the fetuses and children. They have an increased risk of preterm birth, low birth weight, mortality, impaired lung function, asthma, and for adults, forced to respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, COPD, even higher likelihood of developing diabetes, lung cancer, and dying from it. And this is not very intuitive, but it also impairs, air pollution also contributes to the impairment of cognitive function, leading to Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. In September 15, 2 weeks ago, the New England Journal of Medicine published this statement that pregnant people, as the American Lung Association responded in the previous slide, that pregnant people and newborns are particularly vulnerable to the health harms associated with wildfires. And what is alarming is the long-term effect on the mother and on the fetus, lifelong. So isn't this sad? In the future, our children, your children, will not have healthy lungs, healthy organs, healthy body parts because of what they've been exposed to now, even during pregnancy. And this was published just 10 days ago on New York Times, that smoke from wildfires that worsened in the past decade reversed decades of improvements in Western air quality made under the Clean Air Act. Some of you will probably remember that there's been a lot of progress made because of the Clean Air Act. However, because of all the wildfires, and you've heard about the wildfires, especially in California, that advancement had been wiped out because of all the wildfires happening in the world. And there is no safe concentration. Now, you're familiar with this image of flaring. Flaring is burning of natural gas, and it usually happens when, before a typhoon, but not just that, but one of the times that this happens, and they're allowed to do that, when in the process of shutting off the factories, they have to release gas into the air. And this study that was done among 23,000 birds in Eagle Ford region in South Texas from 2012 to 2015, they found association with a 50% greater chance of preterm birth compared to women with no exposure. And just 2 days ago, NPR and New York Times reported that oil field flaring emits nearly 5 times more methane than expected. And you heard that talk from Dr. Sakamoto this morning about methane. In Hurricane Harvey in 2017, I included this slide because we're very close to this area. This is Manchester, which is about 8 miles from here. And I live 2 miles from Manchester. The 340 extra tons of toxic pollution entered the air as Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, and almost all of it concentrated around Manchester. So Manchester, 93% of all known toxic emissions during Hurricane Harvey were concentrated within 4 miles. And remember, I live 2 miles from there. And that's mostly because of flaring. In the Journal of National Cancer Institute, from 2001 to 2014, they studied more than 800,000 cancer patients and found that there is a clear correlation between the distance from an oil refinery and rate of all cancer types. And that range from lymphoma, cancer of the bladder, breast, lung, prostate, colon. And 34% lived in close proximity to an oil refinery among more than 800 cancer patients. And advanced cancer diagnosis more likely among patients living within 10 miles of refineries compared to those who live 21 to 30 miles away. Air pollution and COVID, still too early to tell. But there is a possible link between the long-term exposure to air pollution and increased risk of infection and death from SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now, some good news. The airlines Houston had just launched, September 13th, a site called Airmail. This is a free tool designed to help advocates track and take action on polluter permit notices in their area. And I accessed this just two or 3 days ago. All these dots, which are about 152 of them, these are the current application from industries asking for permission to release possibly toxic air into our environment. So by looking at the Airmail website, you'll be able to voice your opinion or comment on what you think about these different industries being permitted to release possibly toxic air into the environment. And I'm not saying that they are toxic, just possible, but they need permits to do that. So that's my presentation for this morning, and I want to leave you with this, that we are meant to live in communion. We usually think that communion means we just each other, but Sister Linda said this morning, it's really all of us. The air, land, and seas are our brothers and sisters. Solidarity and love for the poor and vulnerable is an expression of our love for our common home. When we fulfill God's intention for us to live as one, we perfect God's meaning for our existence. And awakening our inherent desire to live in a loving relationship with Mother Earth is our spiritual pathway toward union with God. Thank you.
Great. So my name is Rena Anderson, and I'm the Assistant Director for Community Partnerships at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture at the University of St. Thomas of Houston. We're also a co-sponsor for this event. Right now, just a brief little moment to bow your heads in prayer as I begin. Laudato Si. Praise be to you, Lord, God of creation. Guide our prayers so that what seems overwhelming may break down into something effective we can do to protect our common home. Amen. Our second lightning round speaker who will speak about the elements of land in our city is Tommy Garcia Prats. Tommy is the co-founder and executive director of Small Places, a Houston nonprofit that uses high-impact urban farms in under-resourced neighborhoods to provide and foster the tools to cultivate health at every level for every person, regardless of age, income, race, gender, or circumstance. Located just east of downtown, their first farm, Finca Tres Robles, is one of the only farms inside Houston's inner loop. Since 2014, Finca Tres Robles worked to serve their immediate community, striving to be a resource for more than just fresh produce by also hosting hands-on classes, field trips for all ages, and community gatherings. Tommy draws on over a decade's worth of hands-on experience in farming and farm management from his work with some of the most innovative farmers in the hemisphere. He is also an active member of the East End community, serving on the council and eventually as president of the 2nd Ward Super Neighborhood Council, and was honored at Discovery Green in 2020 as one of Houston's unsung heroes for the farm's response to the pandemic. Please, let's welcome Tommy with some applause.
I wanted to begin just by closing our eyes and just taking some deep breaths here. And I want you to think about the first thing that pops into your head when I say the word land. And I want you to just hold on to it for a second as you take a few more deep breaths. You can open your eyes. Anyone have an image of land like this? Like a natural landscape, open field, a river, a mountain. This is actually a farm up in Vermont called Honeyfield Farm that I visited last week. Our former farm employee, Zay, is now working on this farm up in Vermont. And even growing up, I think my vision of land was this other place, this field. And when we talk about land, we kind of go here, but in my experience here in the city, we have a really different language for land. And I think that's something I really want to point out today. You know, the words that I most associate with land in my day-to-day experience are real estate. Oh, this is Houston, a picture of downtown Houston in 1980. Real estate, property, platting, variance, investment, development, gentrification, detention, or the things that we put on land: housing, schools, stadiums, freeways, flood control. This is an overhead view of downtown Houston, 2011, and the red is the parking, kind of just the concrete of our space. In the development and appraisal world, there's a term that's often used called highest and best use. And it's speaking to when we're looking to develop a property, we want to choose the highest and best use so we can get the most out of the development of that space. What are we actually saying here through this term? Highest and best use to whom? And for what purpose and what end? What are the outcomes of this perspective? What is the primary motivation of this view of land? What happens when we talk about land as if it's dead or a thing to be built on? And I remember when Laudato came out in 2015 because at that time I've been farming for about 5 years, and I was just like so excited that the Catholic Church was coming out with something that had spoken to me personally in my spiritual journey, how I got into farming and became a farmer. I can't remember growing up in any of the Catholic communities that are part of that. Our relationship to our environment and to nature was a part of a homily or a sermon, which is why I was extra excited and motivated. I grew up in Houston. I didn't come from a farming background. And I speak of my entrance into farming as really my complete ignorance. How I could be 24 years old and having never touched or been connected to where my food comes from or how it's produced. The source of the thing that sustains us every day. And my belief that land was something outside of where I was, kind of thinking it of that image of the field in Vermont, this like green space kind of outside the city, kind of neglecting that we live on the land every day. And I think in urban settings especially, we forget that land is the source of so many things that sustain us. Just by a show of hands, is there anyone here that's connected to agriculture? So, a few. With another show of hands, does anyone here eat food? And, we laugh and it's funny, but I think for me, I ask these questions because the disconnect is real. We have like an intellectual understanding that, yes, we're connected to food. I mean, we eat it, we go to the store, we buy it. But I think when I ask those questions, the disconnect is real. And it's something that is really important to us in the work that we do as farmers, as people in the city trying to discuss what land is about and what it means. And I think about the language that's used in Laudato Si around land as creation, as our common home, as the source of life, as sacred, And I think of that compared to highest and best use, property, dirt, real estate, land being a commodity only really in reference to its benefit for us or our economy. And this is really important to me because I think there's implications and consequences to having this sort of perspective on land and what we crudely call development. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis writes, "The misuse of creation begins when we no longer recognize any higher instance than ourselves, when we see nothing else but ourselves." And when I ask those questions about our connection to agriculture, it's real that we can't really see anything or imagine anything beyond this sort of communities that we built for ourselves in the city. This is a Google satellite image of maybe a very small radius around where our farm is located in the 2nd Ward. And we're kind of, let's see if this works. There's us smack dab around a lot of concrete and metal buildings with no windows and warehouses. And this is actually the same location from 1944. And I like giving this sort of contrast because I think we forget that it wasn't always like this, right? We forget urbanism is an understanding that we've created and literally built. And this is how, we've chosen to use our land and to divide and parcel our places. I think one of my biggest takeaways from the Laudato Si writings is that land is about relationship. And I love this quote from Wendell Berry, who's a Christian writer and environmentalist. And he says, "We have the world to live in and use of it, to live from on the condition that we will take good care of it. And to take good care of it, we have to know it, and we have to know how to take good care of it. And to know it and be willing to take care of it, we have to love it. And we've ignored that all these years." And as I farmed, and we farmed in Houston the last 8 years, my whole relationship to Houston has completely shifted. Does anyone here know the types of soils that Houston has? Can anyone speak to what Houston seasons are? Because they're not the fall, winter, spring, summer that I grew up learning about, those images of people bundled in snow jackets and 2 feet of snow. The last 8 years has taught me that Houston's a place unlike I've ever been. And so is our climate and our land and our soil. For the last 8 years, we've run an urban farm called Finca Tres Robles, which is Spanish for Three Oaks Farm in the 2nd Ward of Houston. It was a vacant lot, as Dan and myself there when we were just starting, 1.25 acres of land, and we spent most of the first 4 years just getting to know the space and building it out. On Finca, we grow about 20,000 pounds of produce a year, and we distribute that primarily in the Easton community. We sell it as well as provide subsidized and discounted options to folks in our neighborhood, with the goal of keeping 100% of our produce in our community. And we also offer field trips and other opportunities for people to just be on our farm and engage in that space. And here's the view from the first slide. But a few things that we believe is that, good food should be a right. It shouldn't be something that is only accessible for those who have time or the means. We believe that the food we grow on our farm is something that should remain in the community where it's grown. which is much harder than it sounds. And then thirdly, farms are essential health infrastructure for upending systemic inequalities, especially at the neighborhood level. So when I talk about farms, and when I think about my experience of traveling and farming up in Maine and in Iowa, in Central America, having visited farms in Mexico, in Washington, each place has its own sort of smell and feel. Like the land produces a feeling and a flavor. And when we're surrounded in communities that don't have that, it becomes obvious that it's hard to make that connection. And I think a big part of what we want to do for our farm is, how do we get to know our place enough to actually want to care about it and do the work to care for it and to love it. And I think that means we have to re-engage the space and find a way that gives the land a soul again, that returns its smell, its feeling, its flavor. And that's really what our farm works to do. I know when I parked here this morning that there was a smell walking from my car to the auditorium that's different from the community that I live in. And I know we often get belittled when people refer to this sort of belief as just romantic notions or us as idealists. But I look around my community and I look at the data that 3 or 4 of the adults in our neighborhood are overweight or obese. And I talk with our neighbors when we're dropping off produce at their houses and learn about the stress of just the day-to-day existence of trying to pay their bills and keep their kids in school and everything that it takes to survive on a regular basis. And I wonder, is this really serving us? Is our current relationship to land and our common home to creation, is this leading us to lives that tend towards health? And I mean that in every sense of the word, including and especially our spiritual lives. And what do we do about it? I think this is a really vital conversation in Catholic communities. And I think regardless of the fact that the Catholic Church is the largest non-governmental holder of land on earth at an estimated 70 million hectares, which is roughly 172 million acres. And I just want to kind of end where we started again. If we could just close our eyes and take a few deep breaths. And I wanted to close with another Wendell Berry quote. He says, "The world is maintained every day by the same force that created it. It is an article of my faith and belief that all creatures live by breathing God's breath and participating in His Spirit. And this means that the whole thing is holy. There are no sacred and unsacred places. There are only sacred and desecrated places." And what would happen if we thought about our relationship to land in that way? Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Sister Seal Rager, and the promoter of justice, peace, and integrity of creation for the Dominican Sisters of Houston. And we are also one of the co-sponsors for this event this morning. And before I introduce Robbie, I would like you to bow your heads and pray with me. Laudato Si. Praise be to you, Lord God of creation. Help us to use your gift of grace to make life better for all and to renew earth as our home. Our third lightning round speaker this morning is Robbie Robinson, and he will talk to us about the element of water in our city. Robbie is with the Buffalo Bio Partnership. Robbie was raised in Gainesville, Florida, at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. He found a career on the water early in life and has been working with boats for more than 35 years. And now is working with boats in Buffalo Bio. Robbie captains Buffalo Bio's partnership pontoon boat tours and maintains and operates Bayou Back, a custom machine that helps his organization clear nearly 2,000 cubic yards of trash and debris out of Buffalo Bio annually. With the recent unveiling of a new and second generation biovac in 2022, Buffalo Bio's partnership waterway cleanup program, known as Clean and Energy programs, will increase its efficiency and volume significantly. The banks of the bayou are also homes to Robbie's beehives, which he has maintained east of downtown for more than a decade. With a round of applause, please welcome Robbie Roberts.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yes. Good. So that's Gaines, Georgia, instead of Gaines, Florida, but pretty close. That's the Appalachian Mountains. So first, let me tell you about Buffalo Bayou Partnership real quick, or my office will actually have the throat. So Buffalo Bayou goes through the middle of Houston. It's Houston's greatest natural resource, and Buffalo Bayou Partnership is our mission statement is the revitalization and transformation of Buffalo Bayou. So we take care of about a 10 square mile downtown. We built Buffalo Bayou Park, which is in downtown. Now we're going east, and you may have seen us in the news recently. We just Monday got a $100 million grant to develop the east end from Allen's Landing all the way to Delville Park. And this is what the bayou can look like on a beautiful day in Buffalo Bayou. And unfortunately, this is also what it can look like on not such a beautiful day. And the bayous, there's 23 bayous in Houston, and a lot of people don't realize that the bayous are part of the Harris County storm drain system. And so people aren't littering the bayous, people are littering the streets. And so trash collects in the storm drains, just one cup, one bottle on every other street, and that's what you get. So this is where I come in. I run the Clean and Green program for Buffalo Bayou Partnership. And we're funded through Harris County. We have 5 full-time employees. We also have about 150 volunteers from the Harris County court system. And they're our labor pool. And so this is the drainage basin for Buffalo and Laudato Bayou. So it drains about 213 square miles. And this is where the trash comes from. This is where the trash comes out of the storm drains into the bayou. And so what we've done to try to mitigate this problem, we put these booms out up and down the bayou. And then this is what it looks like as they fill up the trash, as the trash comes into the waterways. This is actually one of the booms on Sabine Street. And so this just shows you how bad it can be. It's logs and trash and stuff put together. This is one of our little work boats. That's actually Mike Garver. He's one of our board members, and he's the developer of the Bayou Map, which we're going to get to in just a second. So this is our first system. This is what most cities are using throughout the country to put up the trash. And these are conveyor belt systems, and they're indiscriminate. They just pull up to the trash. They have conveyor belts that load it up, and then they also have to unload it, which is a problem. But these are really limited. They don't work in shallow water. water, is you have to have deep water. And so this was ours. It was painted pink. It was called the Mighty Tidy. You might remember it from years ago. And it sank during Ike. Ike took it away from us, which was actually kind of a blessing. But it was, so Mike Garber invented this boat. This is our first bio vac. It's called BIO vac. And it's got a big vacuum unit on the back side, the front side, and the hose runs in the front. We're actually using it there to clean the bites. You can run up and down the bites with this, and it actually looks like a big shop vac to pick up the trash. And the problem with this is it just sucks it up into a container that's in the center of the boat. And so it was as much work to unload it as it was to load it. And so this is the new generation that we just talked about coming out. And this one has a removable dumper that's on the boat, has a hydraulic arm to assist in picking up the trash. And so it's a lot more efficient. And that's us unloading it and loading it. And so the good news is the bayous in Houston aren't as polluted as you probably think they are. They're actually at least Buffalo Bayou has really clean water day in and day out. It's as clean as the street runoff will let it be. Now that hasn't always been the case. In the 30s, 40s, and 50s, Buffalo Bayou was one of the most polluted waterways in the United States. And then the Clean Water Act of 1972 changed all that. And so now anything that was ever in the bayous has come back wildlife-wise. We have 17 species of fish, and that includes several species that aren't listed there. Saltwater, we have saltwater fish come up the bayou, redfish, black drum, anything from tiny little shads to huge 300-pound alligator gar. In downtown Houston, we have beavers, active beavers swimming, chewing our trees. We have otters. You may have seen the otters on the news. The bayou is teeming with wildlife. The sad bad news is we're inundated with plastic. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of plastic that comes down the bayou. Last year we collected about 2,000 cubic yards. We do about 2,000 cubic yards year in and year out. But that's just a fraction of what actually comes down the bayou. We don't get the majority of it. And so the rest of it ends up in the port and into the Gulf. And then there's 5 gyres, what they call gyres, in the oceans. And the biggest one is in the Pacific Ocean. So in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there is an island of trash that's twice the size of Texas and a quarter of a mile deep. And then there's 4 more gyres, smaller gyres in different parts of the oceans. And so they say by 2050 that there'll be more pieces of plastic in the ocean, more pounds of plastic in the ocean than there are fish. And so we've been talking about the air and all these, and global warming and all these tipping points. So plastic may be a tipping point. It's just now really coming to the light of how bad a problem this is. So this is just Buffalo Bayou that I'm doing, but every major city, or a lot of the majors, most of the major cities are built on rivers. Rivers dump into the oceans. So this is a worldwide problem. It's not just a Buffalo Bayou partnership problem. It's just, that's the only problem I'm kind of an expert on, is Buffalo Bayou. And so if this bothers you, which I hope it does, Texas for Clean Water is Mike Garber, the same gentleman. He started this as a grassroots effort. And so they're trying to get rid of this plastic. The answer to the plastic pollution problem is not picking it up. The answer is to never produce it to start with, or either to have it recycled. And so to that end, it's hard not to produce to start with. Plastic is everywhere. It's in our life. And by the way, it's also in your bodies. Microplastic is just now coming into view. There's not a whole lot of research on it yet, but it is a fact It's in our wildlife. It's pumping through your veins right now. Miniature pieces of plastic. But what Texas for Clean Water is trying to do now is have a bottle bill. So 10 states have a bottle bill. And in those states, you can turn that plastic bottle in and get a deposit back on it, either a nickel or a dime. Oregon started this. Oregon's had it for 30 years. So you give plastic pollution value, and it comes out of the waterways, and it goes back into the stores or gets recycled, gets picked up. And so I'd just like to kind of end this by saying, if you ever get a chance to vote for any kind of plastic reduction or a bottle bill, let's legislate me out of a job. That'd be my best retirement ever.
Each of our panelists represents a different voice in our church, our community, and their own forum for action, which we want to learn about. So to start, panelists, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, what organization, school, or realm of action you represent, and then tell us what sparked your desire to learn more about the ecological crisis and take action for our common home. Then you can tell us why you agreed to participate today in this church-led event. Alexa and Gabe, we'll start with you.
So, hi, my name is Gabriella Palmer. I am a sophomore at St. Catherine's Montessori. And the reason why I was starting to become interested in climate change was during Hurricane Harvey. I noticed the destruction that it caused, and I learned that the destruction was linked to climate change. I was like, how can we prevent this from happening again? And the reason why I'm here today is because people need to take action against climate change, and as young people, we need like adults empowered to help us. So yes, that's why I'm here today.
So hi, I'm Alexa. I'm a sophomore at St. Catherine's Montessori. And what sparked my interest was talking to my science teacher about this bleached coral that we had in our class. She explained that the ocean was like the world's lungs and that it absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And when there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, from burning oils, coals, gas, transportation, electricity, all these things that us humans are doing, it leads to too much CO2 in the ocean. And it then leads to ocean acidification. I found this fascinating, but also really sad that how us humans are ruining the perfect earth God gave us. So I decided to come here because I want to spread awareness about such an important issue that either people don't believe in or don't know is happening. I think it's important to educate others about such a real scientific issue.
Roger? I hope you'll bear with us. We decided that the lavalier mics were better, and so we might be getting a little stumble along the way. But trust us, we're going to get through it all.
Thank you. My name is Roger Ingersoll. I attend both St. Simon and Jude and St. Anthony in the Woodlands. I worked 33 years for a major oil company, and part of my job involved Arctic projects. And I started working in 1980. And the Arctic change, and the things I did was basically permafrost studies and ice coverage and the loads that could happen on platforms and pipelines and things like that. They were really interesting problems. So I started in the 1980s, and the Arctic change was very, very subtle up until about 2005-ish, and then it's greatly accelerated. And actually, about 75% of the ice that was there in 1980 is now gone. And the Arctic can be ice-free as soon as they're predicting about 2035. So what that represents to me is that that's a geologic change, which should happen over millennia, is actually happened over my lifetime. And actually, the Arctic has not been ice-free for about 1 million years, at least 1 million years. So you can see how rapid the change is caused by fossil fuels. The other thing is I became a scuba diver in 2013, and I also became a grandfather that exact same year. And I wanted to go scuba diving with my grandchildren. And the rate of change also since the 1980s is about 50% of the coral reefs in the world have been decimated since then. So I was inspired by Laudato Si, and basically as a father and a grandfather, their future really is really important to me. So that's why I'm here today and what keeps me going.
Thanks, Doug.
My name is Deanna Ennis, and I'm currently the Construction and Preventive Maintenance Director for the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. And in my role, I help the parishes of the Archdiocese in all of the construction and preventive maintenance that they do for our parishes. We have 150 parishes, and every parish may have anywhere from 3 to 6 or 8 or 10 buildings on our campuses. And so I guess my interest in this topic actually came from the fact that in my first career, this is my second career, my first career, I worked in industry. My background is in environmental science, actually. And I worked in environmental science as a consultant in industry. I did work in industrial plants, in hazardous waste, and saw a lot of things. And then at some point, my pastor asked if I would be interested in being the facility director at our parish at St. Lawrence in Sugar Land. And that's when my second career started. I was there for about 15 years. And in that time, I focused a lot on energy efficiency in our parish in an effort to, save cost and do what we could to save money in the parish so we could do more with what we had within the parish. And at that time, energy costs were a lot more than they are today. And so when I was hired by the diocese, I tried to take the knowledge that I learned there in my parish in that role and roll it out to everyone in the diocese. But now it's become more important because energy efficiency is really tied into the whole message of Laudato Si. And so in this role, I've attended some conferences, and one of the conferences that I attended, I met Sister Rika and Monica. And so, why am I here today? Because, you can't ignore the call of Sister Rika and Sister Marie. But of course, I think at one point I was trying to do some seminars myself on this topic and really had trouble finding people in the diocese who could speak for us. So I said, well, you know what? I want to be part of the solution. And so that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
I'm Chris Tomlinson. I'm a columnist for the Houston Chronicle. I write for the business page about money and politics and life in Texas. My interest in the environment began when I was about 7 years old on the very first Earth Day in Dallas. I remember going out to White Rock Lake to pick up trash as part of the first Earth Day, and I came across an area where it was full of pull tabs from the days when you used to pull a tab off of your beer can or your Coke can and you threw away that little metal tab. It wasn't the kind that stays with the can anymore. And there were so many of them, I realized I could spend a week doing nothing but picking up pull tabs. And that got me interested in the environment and environmental protection. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the potential to have an international treaty to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. That was in 1992. But it was my work as a foreign correspondent and as a war correspondent for the Associated Press that really drove it home. And whether it was in South Sudan, covering the battle over the oil fields there, I spent 2 years in Iraq covering the war there, which was basically about energy. I lived in Nairobi, Kenya for 7 years, and I remember hiking to the top of Kilimanjaro and seeing the glaciers as only a fraction of what they had been only a decade earlier. And so in my middle age, I decided to write about what drives all of it, and it's business and it's economics. Energy is something we all rely on. Energy is what is producing this problem. So that's what I try to write about twice a week. On Wednesdays and Sundays in the newspaper. It's what my weekly newsletter talks about, and trying to have intelligent conversations about finding solutions is what I do for a living, and that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Good morning, friends and neighbors. I am Rhonda Sepulveda. I'm the Parish and Government Relations Coordinator for Catholic Charities, and I lose my breath every single time I introduce myself. I am proudly from the East End, a lifelong East Ender, but I am here today by the invitation of Sister Maureen and Monica Hatcher. Thank you so much for sponsoring agents. I'm here because my mentors, my great mentors of advocacy and Catholic social teachings were from our beloved Archbishop Fiorenza, and from my boss, my former boss. Both of them are probably joyfully talking about what we're doing today, Deacon Joe Rubio, and the illustrious Larry Payne, who's in this room today. All of them social justice champions, all of them reminding us what faithful citizenship should look like, sound like, talk like, be like. But I'm also inspired by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word and the Dominican sisters who take the environment seriously, who take this Catholic social teachings of the care for God's creation to a next level and bring this information to us for us to impart today. I get to talk about advocacy and talk to our public officials and work with the Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops and sit on the Catholic Charities USA social policy group and have these conversations at the state level. Talk to our local officials, what is it that we can do and what is it that we can change, and how does our voice make a difference? And what does it look like after we vote? Not just when we cast our ballot. It does not stop there. So thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you. So, Alexa and Gabby, we know that St. Catherine's Montessori is a model among Catholic schools in caring for the environment. You learn about and do projects about the ecological crisis in your classes. You're mindful of reducing energy and water consumption in and throughout your campus. You carefully recycle, and you even have a composting program. Now, this is all quite impressive, which is part of the reason I called you to invite you for today. But what advice can you offer to other students, even teachers, and school staff in our Catholic schools? What have you learned at St. Catherine's that we think we can take and carry to the other schools?
Yes, so one thing that students can do is just ask questions to their teachers. Like, it can simply just, the conversation can just simply start with, what is climate change and how can we help prevent it or slow it down? Students can talk to teachers about building gardens, like outside of classrooms or in like school community spaces to like trap CO2 emissions. Even theology teachers and priests, like on campus, can talk to students about reading the Laudato Si and how it is our job as stewards of God's earth to slow down climate change and take care of our great one.
So, as you said, St. Catherine's is really big on recycling and reusing. I would say it's part of our school's culture. Though, especially after COVID, with the concern of hygiene, everyone has turned to single-use plastics. This has impacted not just our school community, but the greater community. We are seeing these effects as we speak. Some things that we have at St. Catherine's are that we have a water bottle refilling station to encourage reusable water bottles opposed to plastic ones. We Our school buys our electricity from Green Mountain Energy, which is an electricity company made from renewable sources. Also, all our cleaning products are plant or water-based, so there's no harmful chemicals in them. All these things are fairly easy to implement in other schools, and even though they are small things, they can make a big change.
Now you know why I invited them. Roger, you've done so much to promote awareness and education in our archdiocese by giving presentations to parishes, the seminary, and schools. Can you tell us about how the message of climate change and our duty to respond as church is received among the audiences you address? What kinds of opportunities do you see in parishes to bring the message of caring for God's creation to the faithful?
So I started giving presentations in about 2017, and probably given about 40 since then. About half to faith-based groups, and the other half to like universities and secular groups. I would say in the beginning, the audience would tend to have quite a large percentage of skeptics and climate deniers, frankly. But that's changed quite a bit. So, and I think it's because either they become less vocal, or I think it's become just plain obvious that we have a problem and climate change is real and it's a problem. However, in thinking about presentations, it's not easy to get your foot in the door at a parish unless you have a champion or someone that knows you, or you maybe by word of mouth. So giving presentations may not be the best way to do it, or it's one of the ways to do it. But I think other dioceses across the United States have had success setting up creation care teams. And I am here as a complete failure putting together a creation care team. There have been two, as far as I know, within the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. And the parish I was in, and we had 7,000 families, and I had trouble getting 5 people to show up to meetings. We had great speakers, but creation care teams, I do believe, is a great way to go forward. Mary Queen is a parish that still has an active, I think the only active one still in the Galveston-Houston area, so it is possible. But I think to be successful, you need to have a core of committed people, plus you have to have kind of support from clergy. And I understand clergy is extremely busy, and that's very understandable. But I think that the parishioners and the laity can really do the heavy lifting, but it has to be done it's got to be complementary. One group can't really do it well, I think, without the support of the other. The good news is the Catholic Climate Covenant, and we produced a document that you're all going to get a copy of, an electronic copy of later. But there's creation care team formation resources. Catholic Climate Covenant has a wealth of really, really good materials in there and helps you figure out how to start up a creation care team. So I think it's kind of a combination, whatever works, but presentations and then getting creation care into the parishes is really important. But then we need, even from the bishop level, kind of promoting that as well as from clergy.
Thanks, Mark. So Deanna, can you tell us what the Archdiocese is doing to promote better stewardship of natural resources at the parish level? She's giving me the evil eye, but what are the single most impactful things that can be done at a parish level?
Well, I think Roger just hit on some of those, which I would completely agree with, and you also hit on some of the difficulties. I will say since I speak from the archdiocesan part of it, we have done some things. We actually, I said earlier in my introduction that in energy efficiency is one of the things that we can do. And we have, at the diocesan level, we actually have an energy committee, which in the past has really focused on, when the state deregulated energy, it really focused on procuring energy for the entire archdiocese. And that's a great thing, and it was really focused on saving money. But over the last, I'd say 6 or 7 years, actually prior to me even being employed by the archdiocese, they started to focus a little bit on renewables. There was an interest, particularly by a gentleman here in the room, who I'll tip my hat to, Mr. Clark, Bill Clark with Mary Queen Parish, who really challenged the Archdiocese to start thinking about procuring our energy from renewables. And so I would say at this point in time, all of our contract is focused on renewables. So all the energy that the Archdiocese in the 150 parishes and other Catholic entities within the Archdiocese boundaries also are able to be on our contract. So it's not just the parishes. Are getting their energy via renewable resources. And if anybody, a lot of people don't know that. We haven't done a good job or a job at all, to be honest, of putting that out there. So if anybody needs a certificate that shows that or says that or we can promote that or anything like that, I'd be happy to give that to you. But that is a fact. And so I think that what we can do then is at the parish level, start then ratcheting down what we do use, and creating these creation care teams and having professionals that help the parishes do that are some of the things that we can do. But the resources, focus is a problem because our parishes are focused on many things.
Thanks, Anna. But I do agree that I think many people don't know that in the Archdiocese.
No, they don't.
All we need. So that'll be our next adventure.
Publicity. We need publicity.
Chris, obviously, as you mentioned, you've written about a lot of things, not just the environment, but you've been a war correspondent. But here in Texas, at least the political and religious affiliations tend to track closely when it comes to certain hot-button social justice issues, but not so much when it comes to care for creation. Do you have an opinion about the influence of faith or faith communities on the issue of climate change in Texas? And who is caring for the environment?
Well, obviously Texas is a very complex faith environment, and with some very radically different ideas about the role of God, the role of humans, what the planet is, And I think I thought it was especially interesting to hear about the different translations of the word subdue, because honestly, I am not a comparative religions expert, but I have seen that word interpreted in many different ways in many different faiths. Even, if you look at, the Coptic teachings versus the Catholic teachings versus the Protestant teachings. But I also think that there is an element, I think there are economics in everything. And I think even within certain faith groups in Texas, how you make your money, where your money comes from, how you're able to support your family, will influence what you believe as a Christian. I don't believe that, I tend to think it's the economics driving things more than faith, especially when you're talking about people's incomes and their wealth. 40% of Houstonians rely on the oil and gas industry for their income, either directly or indirectly. I like to joke, if you run a sandwich shop out in Bayview, you're in the oil and gas industry. If you operate a dry cleaning business downtown, you are in the oil and gas industry, whether you realize it or not. And so when people come and say, hey, we can't produce as much carbon as we have in the past. Those hydrocarbons are going to have to stay in the ground. Even though you found them, we're going to have to leave them behind. Because to extract them and to combust them is to ruin the planet. Well, for human life, because I don't like this, the planet's going to be here. It's life on this planet. And when we talk about, we're not destroying the planet with climate change, we're destroying its ability to support life. One of the most deeply concerning things, though, are the emails that I receive and the arguments that I hear that God will provide. that we do not have to worry about how much carbon we release into the atmosphere because God will provide. He always has, He always will. And, that to me is coming from the more evangelistic, fundamentalist Protestant churches, where you have very large congregations, many of whom make their living off of the oil and gas industry. I also think one of the challenges from a faith and economics point of view is the unwillingness of many pastors today to stand up and talk about these issues, knowing full well that in their congregation, some of their biggest donors, some of their biggest supporters are people who can only finance the church because they are extracting oil and natural gas from the ground. And that, I think that's why there's a lot of reluctance in some faith communities. Yes, the business columnist is saying everything comes down to money and economics, but I think that's why I was brought here, is to talk about that. But, fundamentally, we are going to have to transform the economy in ways that are unimaginable to most people over the age of 40. And that's going to require a financial sacrifice, and it's going to require us and our faith communities to wean ourselves off of the profits that destroying the climate has made for us. So,
thanks so much, Chris. So, Rhonda, you don't have anything to follow up on. But since the Texas legislature will be convening again for this biennial in January, in what ways can Catholics make their concerns known to their lawmakers? Given what Chris just said about concerns regarding who's going to support the church, what can we as Catholics do? Has the Texas Bishops' Conference included any environmental issues on the list of legislative priorities? What are they? And how do we support that?
I just have to say thank you to my fellow panelists for making this job as the last presenter hard. Y'all are so brilliant and so articulate. So this morning, I have to tell you, this morning when I got up at 5 and I was like, I said, let me just open my Bible. And if any of you believe in the living word, and I said, let me just open my Bible and see what God reveals to me. And Isaiah 24 was what my eye went to. And the first verse of Isaiah is that particular chapter speaks on the apocalyptic versions of creation. And I'm like, thank you, God. But I'm also like, thank you, God, for reminding us of our serious responsibility to our earth. And how is it that we are supposed to speak in this modern time for a place that only our voices, just like we speak for the unborn, our earth has a voice too. But the voice for us comes from us. It comes to us through our vote. It comes to us after our vote. But this is what Isaiah said in the first verse.
Ron, if we could hold it up just.
Yes. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Isaiah 24 verse 1 says, "Lo, the Lord empties the land and lays it to waste, He turns it upside down, scattering its inhabitants. That's a sobering thought. And I absorbed that. And I'm like, okay, this is why I'm here. But yes, the bishops, all 15 bishops of the state of Texas came together earlier this year and said, we have to put forth an agenda. In a few weeks, we're going to be called to vote at midterm elections. Please, those of you in the room, share this with your neighbors. There are legislators who went to check for their registration because our voter rights have been compromised to some degree. That legislator was not even registered to vote. So please check. Even if you think that you are already registered, please make sure that before October 11th, you are a registered voter. In a few weeks, we'll be voting for midterm elections. Please, my friends and neighbors, go to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Faithful Citizenship document on forming your conscience. Review that document as a person of faith, as a person who cares about this environment, as a person who chooses to vote, as a person who prays before you vote, to determine where your vote belongs. And when you cast that ballot, remember that find out what district you're in, whether it be federal, state, local. Find out who represents you. And remember that you are the constituent. You have a duty and responsibility to follow up with that elected official, whether you voted for him or her or not, and say, I am your constituent. And you hold that person to their agenda. You hold that person to what their responsibilities are to our local and state and federal governments. Yes, the bishops do take these into account, and I'll tell you what their priorities are for this legislative session. So they include life and family, immigration, restorative justice, education, healthcare, social concerns, religious liberty, and creation. On their issue of creation, it says that the church promotes an integral ecology that calls us to receive creation as a gift. It recognizes the interrelation between the good of the human person and of the environment. To be, I can't read my own writing, to be stewards of our common home, so that generations to come may also enjoy its bounty. And the priorities on creation are 4: to support efficiency and conservation in water use, to maintain available for irrigation and drinking, to support the transparency and community engagement in environmental planning and regulation, supporting efficiency in disaster recovery, and coordinating with nonprofits, including Catholic charities, and supporting efficiency and conservation in energy use and efforts to mitigate pollution.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about what we can do, but maybe we can also ask, what do you see as the biggest threats to action? Because we seem to wrestle with a lot of challenges and obstacles. What's really at stake for our future? So, our young women from St. Catherine's like to start?
Yes. So one of the biggest obstacles I face is that I hear a lot of people saying that our generation is going to have to make a change. If we wait until we're adults, it's going to be way too late. We do have a big role in what we have to do, but we need y'all's help. The weather is imposing threats to society. For example, Hurricane Ian right now, and all the other past hurricanes that have hit us and nearly hit us and just destroyed Louisiana. To stabilize the Earth's temperatures, we need greenhouse gas emissions to reach net zero by 2050, meaning they're going to have to be halved by 2030. 2030 is around the corner. It's 8 years from now. And if we keep going at the same rate we are now, there aren't going to be many more generations after ours. If we want to make the Earth a better place, we need to start with ourselves and make the change.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would also like to talk. So we also need people and like adults in positions of power, either like political or religious, like talking to pastors about what can we do as a church community to like fight against climate change, like leading trash pickups, leading donations to organizations against climate change, doing things like that. And also, if you can, please write to your congressman and ask them what is their goal to combat climate change, and make sure that they hold themselves accountable to combat climate change.
Thank you. Roger.
I think the biggest challenge and threat right now is kind of apathy and lack of urgency. Even with Hurricane Harvey, I don't know if you look at some of the data after that, the public opinion, and this is Catholics as well, didn't move the needle very much, which is really hard to understand. And now we have catastrophe after catastrophe, that are happening, like Ian is happening now. You've got the Philippines and typhoons and the floods in Pakistan. It's just incredible the number of things that are happening. And honestly, I think people are just apathetic because they're somewhat overwhelmed by the problem now. It just seems intractable. And to some degree, I don't think the USCCB has been very helpful in the sense that climate change has honestly been put to second-tier status. They publicly said that abortion is the preeminent issue, and then all the other social justice issues tend to be secondary. Now, abortion is definitely something that we believe against, but there's also many other things that are equally as important. And we have to recognize that climate change is a critical life issue. It's not just our lives, it's the lives of millions of species that are at risk of going extinct in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So I think the church really needs to get on board with Pope Francis and have a consistent ethic of life. It's not just conception and birth, which has been the focus. There is a whole spectrum of life from conception to natural death. And until the church embraces it, but the laity, if we could only get support from our pastors and from deacons, and it's a collaborative effort. We can do the heavy lifting. We can carry the ball. We can do it, but we can't do it in isolation. It really has to be a team effort. So that's my concern.
Thanks, Roger.
Well, you didn't leave me much. Well, actually, I share all of Roger's concerns because for us to really do what needs to be done at the parish level, for the things that I'm concerned about in my ministry here in the Archdiocese, and just as a Catholic, lifelong Catholic here in this Archdiocese, from what I see, I agree. But I also have thought a lot about what Chris has said, that we don't hear anything about this issue, in the pews. And so that's pretty stunning. And there's never been a conference on this encyclical in our Archdiocese. And so that's pretty stunning too. And so, we have to learn, there has to be education, and we have to act on it, and, we can't act until the laity and everybody, learns. We have to get on board, we have to talk.
And we have to be willing to talk about difficult things, and we have to be willing to change. And I think the things that I think about a lot is no one would have expected the pandemic. Nobody would have expected we would have been shut in our homes for, the better part of 18 months. So, to me, what that says, it was horrible. It was bad. So, think about all the things that nobody can imagine right now good that could happen if we could imagine some change. That's meant to be hopeful.
Thank you. I would say the biggest obstacle is the sin of pride. That's the biggest problem I see. And pride leads to a lack of compromise. Pride leads to arrogance and ignoring the nuance. Pride makes us think that we have all the solutions, and that our path forward is the only one. Because mitigating climate change is going to require an enormous amount of compromise and innovation and nuance. To break down what I see as the major conflict is you have scientists who say we can only release so much more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And right at the present pace, you've got about 10 years. If you maintain the present pace, you will exceed that budget, that carbon budget, in 10 years. That budget can be stretched out if we start reducing now. On the other side, I have the energy companies, Exxon, Shell, BP, who look at demand. And they can tell you exactly how many terajoules of energy the world needs to maintain its present standard of living. And they can tell you how many terajoules of energy are going to be required to bring out people out of poverty in Africa and Asia. Both sides speak past each other. The energy companies say, hey, this is the demand, I have to meet the demand, and to meet this demand, I have to produce so much carbon. And the environmentalists are like, well, but you can only release this much. And after that, life on the planet gets really miserable really quickly. They have to compromise. We can't say, Professor Sakamoto talked about the small nuclear reactors, the modular reactors. When I write about that, people go nuts about how on earth can we talk about more nuclear reactors. Nuclear energy is a fabulous way to produce energy without creating emissions. It creates waste, it creates other things, but you have to deal with the alligator that's closest to the boat. And, these are the kinds of conversations we have to have, and there's a lot of nuance that we have to consider. And all I get and all I see is a lot of prideful people saying, I have the solution and you all have to bend to my solution. And it's on all sides. People have this problem. So if we want to move forward, we have to cooperate, we have to innovate, we have to give people to try that crazy idea that just might work. But most of all, we have to set aside our pride.
So Christ told us, love your neighbor. Our neighbor includes our Mother Earth. Our neighbor includes the people that live on the other side of the world. Our neighbor includes the people in this room. But love in itself is an action word. And we sometimes fail miserably to love our earth. We sometimes miserably fail to love our human person, especially when they don't fit into our box. But I'm going to ask you a few questions. I have 4. One is on access, one is on commitment, one is on transformation, and one is on advocacy. So my first question to you is, what can we do to identify and measure our impact on the natural world? This is your homework. What can we do to identify and measure our impact on the natural world? On our commitment, what process can companies and organizations do to follow to set nature-based targets? What process can companies, organizations follow to set nature-based targets? On transformation, which immediate, midterm, and long-term steps can we take to protect and regenerate ecosystems? Which midterm and long-term steps can we take to protect and regenerate ecosystems? And then my favorite, the advocacy question. How can we leverage our influence on policy and public opinion and market to accelerate the systemic transition to a positive future? How can we leverage an influence on public policy and opinion and markers to accelerate the systemic transition to a positive future? We're all responsible. Sometimes we forget our responsibility whenever we, like I did today, I threw a Coke can into a trash can. And I was reminded by my boyfriend, because that was a recycling. Why did you throw it in the trash can? So I think that's just big steps and small steps. But advocacy is essential in order for us to move the needle along. Thank you.
Thank you. I just think your last little speech, somebody reminded me that you should not